Hello students. After reading this module, we would come to know that the degree to which we conform depends also is affected by our culture. We would learn the meaning of conformity with reasons that make us to conform. We would also learn the various factors that affect conformity and how culture becomes one of the important factors in affecting conformity. We would be able to identify the reason for the division of cultures into individualistic and collectivistic. We would also identify the reasons of their conformity. We would be able to evaluate that culture is one of the factors that affects conformity, but it in itself is very powerful to influence on to conform. Imagine a normal day in college. You are hungry. It is only the middle of the month and you are left with just the last bit of your pocket money. You want to eat in the canteen on campus, yet somehow you end up eating in an expensive cafe because all your friends wanted to eat out. If you have experienced this or something similar, then you are already familiar with one of the most potent kinds of social influence, that is, conformity. Conformity refers to a type of social influence wherein people change their attitude and or behavior in order to adhere to the widely accepted social norms. It might be interesting to note that changes in overt behavior and attitude caused by conformity do not imply changes in internal concepts such as beliefs. This desire to behave more like the majority is driven primarily by two kinds of social norms. Descriptive norms. Norms that describe how most people behave in a given situation, and injunctive norms, that is, the norms that tell us how we ought to behave in specific social situations. Many social norms provide a basis for predictable interaction and efficient decision making. The collective benefits associated with sociality require some level of conformity to those norms. Indeed, failures to conform to the enduring group or cultural norms are often viewed by others not merely as an embarrassing but as a contemptible moral transgression. But even though it might appear to curb personal freedom to some extent, conformity plays a very important role in ensuring that we do not end up in utter social chaos. Classical studies on conformity. Although the first psychologist to study conformity was Janis in 1932, the first truly groundbreaking and widely popular series of experiments on conformity was conducted by Solomon Asch in 1951 and 1955. Asch's line judgment task. In this classic experiment, Asch asked participants to judge which one of the three comparison lines matched a standard line in length. The participants were present in the experimental setting with several others who responded to the perceptual judgment task before them. Unknown to the participant, all other fellow participants were in fact the assistants of the researcher, instructed to respond to the task in a predetermined manner. On 12 out of 18 trials, known as critical trials, the researcher's accomplices gave responses that were clearly incorrect. Thus, the participant in Asch's experiment faced a crucial dilemma: whether to stick to their own judgment or go along with the majority. Results indicated that a large majority of the participants in the experimental group chose conformity. In total, 76% of the participants went along with the accomplice's wrong answer at least once. In contrast, among the participants in a control group, a mere 5% made such errors. Asch's work on conformity has received widespread support and acceptance. It has been replicated in many studies under a wide variety of conditions. Asch's results were extremely important to the field of psychology in two crucial ways. First, the real power of social pressure to conform was demonstrated clearly and scientifically for the first time. Second, this early research sparked a huge wave of additional studies that continued later. A line of criticism commonly heard concerns whether Ash's findings can be generalized to situations in the real world. It must be pointed out, however, that although real-life matters of conformity can certainly be more meaningful, it is equally likely that the pressures for conformity from groups in the real world are also proportionately stronger. Sheriff's autokinetic effect experiment. Sheriff's experiment in 1936 was designed with the aim to demonstrate that people conform to group norms when they are placed in an ambiguous situation. He placed participants in a dark room with a small dot of light projected onto a screen, and the participants were asked to guess how far the point of light moved. In fact, the point of light was stationary and only appeared to be moving due to an optical illusion. He discovered that when participants were asked to judge individually, their estimates of the distance of movement of light varied considerably. However, when these participants were grouped into triads, the estimates of distance converged towards the group norm. Sheriff thus concluded that in ambiguous situations, people look to others to seek information and guidance in order to take the right decision or indulge in correct behavior. Sheriff has been criticized for using a situation that was ambiguous, unusual, and unlikely to reflect a real-life situation. His research was criticized to be artificial and lacking ecological validity. Both these studies raised curtains from the strong pressures to conform that people face in day-to-day social situations and established fertile grounds for other researchers to investigate the nature of conformity and explore its causes, effects, and limits. What causes conformity? The fact that most people conform to societal or group norms more often than not draws attention to the basis of conformity. Researchers including Deutsch and Girard in 1955 and Insko in 1985 have pointed out two major reasons for why people often choose to go along or conform. They have explained conformity by drawing attention to two essential motivations possessed by all human beings: a wish to be liked by others and a wish to be right or accurate. In addition, Boiler and Griffin in 1994 have indicated towards the cognitive processes that cause us to look at conformity as entirely warranted after we have engaged in it. Normative social influence. Much research in social perception and interpersonal attraction has focused on the human tendency to like those who are similar to us in one way or other. Hence, quite often when we want to be liked by others, we make a conscious effort to appear to be more like them by agreeing with them or behaving in ways that match their behavior. One important reason why we conform then is because we know that it will help us in winning the sanction and acceptance that is desired by us. In the introductory example, for instance, the person goes out to eat in an expensive restaurant as he or she wants to continue being a part of his or her friend circle by matching their behavior and choices. This cause of conformity is known as normative social influence. Normative influence is particularly effective since people who do not conform to the group are more likely to be made fun of or rejected, even be punished by some of the group members. For instance, in the classic line study by Ash in 1956, the subjects conformed to the group not because of the fact that they believed the group consensus reflected reality, but because it was easier to go with the group than having to face the consequences of going against it. Correspondingly, When people have a heightened desire to affiliate with a group, mimicry tends to increase. Informational social influence. Life in the social world is complex and often beyond objective measurement, capable of giving an accurate estimate of right and wrong behavior. This is why we frequently look to others to try to make sure that our opinions and behaviors are correct. In situations where we are unsure of the accuracy of our own views and actions, other people's opinions and behaviors represent the social reality for us, and we refer to them as guides for our own behavior. This basis of conformity is called the informational social influence, as it is based upon our desire to be right by depending on others as a source of information about certain aspects of the social world. Hence, when people have an elevated motivation to be accurate and find themselves in relatively ambiguous situations, conformity becomes increasingly likely. When you change your initial opinion on an issue after hearing an opposing view from someone whom you deem to be highly knowledgeable, it is this kind of conformity that you are displaying. Factors on conformity. The evidence that we have considered so far suggests that humans have a strong tendency to conform, but even so, it is clear that not everybody conforms, nor does one person succumb to conformity pressures across diverse conditions. So what is it that determines when is it most likely to conform? Research suggests that many factors play a role. Some of these have been discussed here. The first is cohesiveness. Cohesiveness refers to all the factors that hold group members together as a coherent social entity. When cohesiveness is high, that is, when we highly value being a part of a particular group, pressures of conformity are equally magnified. Group size. Conformity tends to increase as the group size increases. Although Ash concluded that such effects are shown only up till the group strength of 3 members, beyond which conformity seems to level off. Subsequent research reported that these effects persist even up till group sizes of 8 members and beyond. Unanimity. Individuals seem more likely to conform when the rest of the group has a unanimous opinion or stand. Group status. Conformity to high status groups is relatively higher than to the low status groups. Culture. Individuals in collectivistic cultures display a greater tendency to conform than those in the individualistic cultures. Gender. Gender differences established and exercised by societal norms exert strong influences on the way men and women respond to social influence. Research suggests that women are more likely to conform when on surveillance relative to when they are not. Age. Perhaps driven by informational social influence, younger people are more likely to give in to conformity pressures. Importance of stimuli. The normative focus theory suggests that the influences of norms on the behavior is mediated by how important or central the stimulus is to the person at the time the behavior occurs. When participants were told that their responses to the questions in a study will be used for designing the safety signals in an aircraft, conformity decreased substantially, suggesting that the need to conform may decline when a task is considered critical. Clarity of stimuli. As demonstrated by Sheriff's experiment, people are more likely to conform when they find themselves in unfamiliar and ambiguous situations. Minority. A dissenting minority may also reduce the pressures to conform. A minority which holds fast to its position against the majority group compels group members to rethink their decisions and thus lessens the conformity. Conformity and culture. In the previous section, we mentioned briefly about the differential effects that different cultures exert inadvertently on the extent to which its members conform. Here, we will discuss in detail the relationship between culture and conformity. One of the most widely known cultural distinctions in conformity is made on the basis of how much emphasis a culture places on the self as opposed to the others. Individualistic cultures hold personal independence, uniqueness, and competitiveness as desirable values. Personal self is placed above family, kinship, and society, and thus the pressure to conform is seen to a lesser degree in such cultures. Collectivistic cultures, on the other hand, value interdependence, sharing, common interests, family, kinship, and society above the personal self. In such cultures, any person displaying individuality is perceived to be like a sore thumb, sticking out and hurting the uniformity of the group. There is a lot of research which supports this distinction. For example, Smith and Bond in 1998 discovered cultural differences in conformity between Western and Eastern countries. Westerners, such as people from America and the UK, were more likely to be individualistic and didn't want to be perceived as being similar to everybody else. Bond and Smith in 1996 analyzed the results of 113 studies that has used Ash's line judging task in 17 different countries. The countries were then categorized in terms of the degree to which they would be considered individualistic versus collectivistic in orientation. They reported a significant relationship between conformity and individualistic versus collectivistic cultures, such that conformity was found to be higher in collectivistic than in individualistic cultures. Triandis in 1990 explains that in individualistic cultures, most people's behavior is determined by personal goals that overlap only slightly with the goals of the collective entities such as family, neighbors, work groups, tribe, political allies, fellow countrymen, and the state. When a conflict arises between personal and group goals in individualistic cultures, it is considered acceptable for the individual to place personal goals ahead of the collective goals. Conversely, in collectivistic cultures, social behavior is determined largely by goals shared with some collective, and if there is a conflict between personal and collective goals, it is considered socially desirable to place collective goals ahead of personal goals. In another study, Kim and Marcus in 1999 analyzed advertisements from popular magazines in the United States and in Korea to examine if any differences existed in their emphasis on uniqueness and conformity. They found that while magazine ads in the US focused on uniqueness, example, choose your own view and individualize, Korean ads tended to emphasize more on the themes of conformity, such as 7 out of 10 people use this product, and our company is working toward building a harmonious society. Berry has offered yet another explanation for the differences in conformity caused by cultural differences. Taking the mode of sustenance into account, Berry suggested that societal values are determined to a large extent by the society's mode of sustenance and in turn influence conformity. According to Berry, Child and Bacon in 1954, qualities such as obedience and responsibility are emphasized upon in the socialization processes of high food accumulating societies such as agricultural and pastoral societies. On the other hand, societies which are built upon practices that allow independence and movement, such as hunting and fishing, lay more emphasis on self-reliance, competition, personal achievement, and independence. Highly disciplined societies thus show higher levels of conformity. Berry's theory also suggests a link between cultural values and conformity stressing the fact that cultures of subsistence economies give in to conformity more as they are rather free from outside influences. When traditional samples were compared with those who had been exposed to westernization through Western education, urbanization, and wage employment, Berry found that exposure to Western concepts and values led to a weakening of traditional norms and less cross-cultural variations in conformity. Ash's classical study acted as a catalyst for a plethora of related research. Various studies done on the lines of Ash's experiment have reported significant cultural differences in conformity. Milgram in 1962 found that Norwegian students conformed more than the French students. In Zimbabwe, Ghana, and Fiji, people showed higher levels of conformity as compared to low levels of conformity found in Germany. There is some evidence for greater conformity in Chinese and Brazilians when they were compared with Americans. A small and inconsistent bit of literature also suggests differences between blacks and whites in the United States. Isco, Willin, and Harvey in 1964 found less conformity among black women compared with white women, there being little difference among men, and yet both Cis-Trunk in 1971 and Long in 1970 found that blacks conformed more than the whites. Schneider in 1970 found no overall difference, although whites were more influenced by a white majority than a black majority, whereas the ethnic composition of the majority had little effect for blacks. This shows that culture dominates in the domain of conformity. Finally, based on the analysis of attitude surveys conducted twice, first in 1967 to 1969 and again in 1971 to 73 in the subsidiaries of a large multinational US corporation, Hofstede in 1980 reported that as opposed to individualistic cultures, where there is a clear distinction between the self and the other, the society and the larger cultural group, people in collectivistic cultures derive a considerable portion of their identity from significant others, groups, and the society. Collectivistic cultures emphasize group decision making rather than individual decisions, and there is an emotional element involved with membership in organizations and institutions, consequently increasing the pressures to conform. Summary: conforming to others in a group is important as they set norms for to be followed and provides us information for those issues for which we are ignorant. Conforming to others is affected by cultures. It is believed that some cultures conform more than the others. A lot of differences have been found between cultures on the lines of individualism and collectivism. Researches done over various countries have found that individualistic countries are low on conformity as compared to the collectivistic cultures. The differences could be due to the fact that individualistic and collectivistic countries have differences in their values, importance they lay on the group, and their identification with them. In individualistic culture, people are more self-made and self-dependent, and they are taught to take their own decisions and owe the responsibility of it. Thus, in such cultures, people conform less. On the other side, in collectivistic cultures, people are interdependent for everything and they take decisions collectively. Hence, in such cultures, people conform more.